Hi, so this is Pamela from Animal Justice Emergency, and today we're talking about franchise activism and how people doing franchise activism, like Cubes or the Saves, could potentially make a huge difference in their effectiveness by a few simple tweaks. This was triggered for me by a quote I saw from Gary Francione, the US abolitionist professor of law. We live in a world of limited time and resources. One cannot identify what actions one should choose in the absence of a theory that identifies those actions that are consistent with the moral basis of the movement. I thought this was really interesting because it kind of chimed in with some stuff that I'd been thinking over the years since I first became vegan about 5 years ago. And I went vegan overseas in Asia, and because there wasn't really much happening where I was, I got a lot of my information from the UK on Facebook and social media. And I had this kind of amazing sort of like, wow, there's so much going on in the UK and Australia and the US, and wow, they've got the Saves, they've got the Cubes, they've got the DXEs, they've got marches and chalking and all sorts of stuff. So I couldn't wait to come back to the UK, which I did a couple of years ago, and see what was going on. So I went to Saves and some Cubes, I've done some chalking and stickering, and you know, my feelings really changed. So let's talk about the Cubes and the Saves and similar kinds of activism, and are they making the most difference that they possibly can? Or, as Francione is perhaps implying, is there a slight lack of theory, a lack of notion of where they want to go with that activism, that is actually preventing their activism from being as effective as it could? I totally respect people that are doing Cubes and Saves and all other kinds of activism. With the Saves, they get up really early in the morning in the UK in some places, and the Cubes, they're turning out, they've got jobs. And many of them are first-time activists, and maybe this is why they're on this sort of repetitive wheel of doing the same thing. The same thing, the same thing, the same thing. And it doesn't change. Jake Conroy has done a bit of research, I think mainly on the Cubes, and he says, not really, having random conversations with the best will in the world is not having a huge amount of impact vis-a-vis the amount of time that people are using, and dedication that people are using. And similarly with the Saves, it's like, well, they are paying their respects, but what does that actually mean in terms of delivering some kind of change for the trillions of animals that are being tortured to death every single year? Paying one's respects, you're taking up a lot of your own time and energy and re-traumatizing yourself. Is it effective? And if you want to do that sort of activism, and it's entirely your own choice, is there a way that some simple tweaks could make it much more effective? I became a little bit involved in the Saves, and one of the things that I was startled to find out, apart from the amount of work that seemed to be involved, was that they were funded, apparently, and probably still are, by a US venture capitalist. So it's not like they struggle for funding. But if you've got funding, do you need to be doing the same thing every single week? Maybe you could do the same thing once a month and something different for the rest of the time that would be more effective. What sort of something? Well, both with the Saves and the Cubes, I don't understand why they're not contacting the media when they do an event. You just need a press release, start to build up some relationships with the journalists of your local area, and this can be press, and they're desperate for content. Make up some relevant hook, first time in such and such a town, or it's summer, kids are eating ice cream. Or did you know that your kids' ice cream came from a mother cow who was going to be tortured to death and her baby taken away from her? Is that fair? Is that respectful to the animal? We want our kids to respect other animals. Is this a respectful way to be? Tie it in with the summer or whatever. I'm not saying that it's necessarily the easiest thing in the world to get some media coverage. But certainly if you're not trying, it's never going to happen. Once you start to get the ball rolling with some media coverage, then hopefully you can build up some relationships with the journalists and put in more stories that are getting the rights-based aspect of animal rights and animal liberation into the general public arena, which is what we want, don't we? Similarly with the cubes, I don't know how much attention or awareness they have of trying to get stories into the media proactively. And the question is, why not? You know, you're engaging with people. Why not try and engage with more people? But more than that, what is the theory of change of the saves or the cubes or people doing stickering or chalking? They're all floating around, and basically it seems to be a sort of like a fairly nebulous thing about raising awareness and talking to people or paying respects, showing the awful footage, and then somehow the change will happen. Is that actually how change happens? Other social justice movements have things like demands. And I remember the first time that I talked to one of these franchise activists about demands, they just didn't know what I was talking about. And I found that kind of quite odd. My background is I've done social justice work and campaigning for some time, and it seems odd to be amongst people that call themselves activists and they don't know about demands. Another thing that the Saves and the Cubes could but don't do is collect email IDs of people that they're talking to. Well, certainly the Cubes could do that. And have a newsletter or something to keep people on board with what's going on. Normal activism, normal grassroots activism uses these processes, collecting contact details, email lists, talking to the media, and having a list of significant and coherent demands. That is how normal activism works outside of the vegan bubble. And it seems to me that we've got such a powerful message of ending the war on animals that we should be using this. And we should take both ourselves and the other animals seriously. We're using our time, energy, and resources, but are we using them effectively? I don't understand why Saves and Cubes, for example, can't get together and do joint actions somewhere, because I think it would be really powerful. Perhaps around in the area around a slaughterhouse. You know, maybe we'd have stickering and flyers and chalktivism specifically targeting a particular slaughterhouse. Why not? If you had meetings and you were discussing things, you would come up with ideas of things that you wanted to do, and you could try them as you had already had your groups assembled, and then see what worked. See if it seemed to be having a bit more impact. There's so much potential, you know, and so many dedicated people in the Saves and the Cubes. There's so many people that want to do more. So many vegans that they want to do more. They want to be activists. They call themselves activists, but with no exposure to anything other than franchise activism. I'm concerned that they're wasting their time, their energy, that they may be being re-traumatized. And I think that's awful. I think it's awful for them, and I think it's awful for the animals. With some relatively simple tweaking, could franchise activism go to a whole new level of effectiveness? And that would mean as well educating ourselves on the roots of animal rights, the importance of talking about rights, not talking about things like cruelty, not getting it locked into the welfarist sort of like paradigm of friends and kindness and compassion, and sticking with the rights-based paradigm of respect and rights for other living beings. And then having a theory of change about, well, if we do this, this and this, let's see what happens. You know, if we target one slaughterhouse for a number of different weeks, outreach in the local area, local community, talk to them maybe about COVID or whatever, talk to the press, see what happens. Anyway, these were my thoughts on franchise activism. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on franchise activism. Thank you. This is Pamela from Animal Justice Emergency, and together we can end the war on animals.